On the interaction between science and policy, I think a first thing to note is that macroeconomic science actually emerged from the need to address practical policy issues related to the Great Depression in the 30s. Science and policy perform complementary tasks. Without any understanding of how the real world operates, it would be rather difficult to influence it. And similarly, it seems less relevant to understand what is going on if these insights are not used for better policies. And scientists and policymakers therefore need to make efforts to understand each other. I therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I therefore do not believe in a model in which universities focus exclusively on science, while policy-making institutions abstain from any role in scientific research. The potential synergies between both functions are large, but it takes continuous efforts to realize those. In the Netherlands, we have a really strong tradition of basing policies on scientific insights, thanks to the efforts made by Jan Tinbergen and the Netherlands Bureau for Economic Policy. And as a policy maker, it was mentioned already, in the Ministry of Finance in the 70s, and as a policymaker, I've been very much influenced by the so-called VINTAF models of the Planning Bureau. Influenced means in this context that I based my policy recommendations, for example, to former Minister of Finance Frans Andries, who is present here also today. I based my policy recommendations also to him to a large extent on the insights generated by, and Theo van der Klandert did also quite a lot of work on this. I based it on, as I said, the insight generated by these models and the theory behind these models. As, ladies and gentlemen, as for central banks, I believe that the worldwide movement towards independence has been one of the driving factors of a greater orientation towards the scientific foundation of policies. And this, essentially, I think this is a matter of accountability. Being free from political influence and preferences, our legitimacy partly depends on it. And as such, we have, as central banks, we have found practical ways and means for fostering mutual understanding between science and policy. One is the so-called direct way. Several central banks have appointed renowned academics in top positions. Ben Bernanke is, as you know, at the Federal Reserve. Mervyn King at the Bank of England. Athanasios Orphanides at the Central Bank of Cyprus and at the European Central Bank. And Stan Fischer at the Bank of Israel. And we, in our central bank, they are less famous admittedly, but we in our central bank have several extraordinary professors at Dutch universities. And I've been one of them for 10 years. It is not only that policy discussions benefit from discussions of these people, they also use their networks for bringing topical policy issues into the scientific debate. Another way for bringing science and policy closer is by hiring specialists in central banks who understand the language of a specific discipline. This is what we do at the Dutch Central Bank. We employ researchers in all fields that relate to our core tasks. For example, research in recent years has focused on Mervyn King's point about why modern monetary policy strategies may work in stabilizing inflation expectations. But it has also dealt with decision-making within committee structures, an extremely important issue for us in the context of the European Central Bank. It has dealt not only with committee structures, but also with economic modeling, payment system, behavioral finance. You stole from us, as I always say, Henriette Prast, and it has dealt with the efficiency of banks, financial conglomerates, and so on and so forth. Researchers at DNB actually have a challenging job in bridging science and policy. They have to keep themselves up to date with scientific developments in their fields. They work independently, also in our bank. They work independently on policy, I have to add, on policy-relevant topics, and they are asked to translate their findings into practical policy advice. This last element is probably what distinguishes research at central banks.